1967 with a huge color picture of her assuming the helm of the House. We're honored to have her with us today, the Speaker of the House of the United States Representatives, Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Charles. I can't wait to go up and see that because my grandchildren are in that picture. Charles, thank you to all the founders, the funders, the staff of who made the museum possible. We are, all of us who care about freedom in our country and throughout the world, are deeply in your debt. I was telling Al earlier that I remember once we had a lunch over in Arlington, and he was telling us about this idea long before it came to fruition. Thank you very much for your vision and this great idea. Of course, it is an honor for me to be here today, Speaker of the House, personally as well. As raised in a political family, I read newspapers morning, noon, and night, every edition. The Bulldog edition starting the night before, and then the 1-star, the 2-star, the 3-star. So I can't wait to take the tour here. It's a special honor to be here with my colleague, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and she and I are always honored to be any place John Lewis is. He is a great patriot. He sacrificed more to ensure that our nation is true to its founding ideals than almost anyone, and he was a friend and partner, as we saw, to the great leader, Reverend Martin Luther King. I want to acknowledge Prime Minister Mulroney and the Ambassador. Remember when the Canadian Embassy was opened here, what we can do that? Well, you started it all on Pennsylvania Avenue, I think. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. I don't know if any of you know, but in the 1950s, Reverend Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King traveled to India to study the Gandhian principles of nonviolence, which my colleague Mr. Lewis referenced. And what is interesting, I think, is that is in Sanskrit, the word satyagraha means nonviolence, and it also means insistence on the truth. Truth insistence. And isn't that what your profession is all about? Our deep belief and defense of the First Amendment's guarantee of a free speech and a free press is deeply rooted in that insistence on truth. It's what we depend on before. When the framers of our Constitution over 220, well, you know when it was, years ago, were writing our Constitution, at that time, a message could only travel as fast as a horse could gallop or a ship could sail. That was, well, I'm not taking into consideration a dove. But in any event, that's all it could do. And yet, even with that gap in communication, our founders knew that freedom of press was essential to what they were doing, establishing this new country with all that optimism. And they said at the time, they called it a new order for the centuries. They said it in Latin, but it's on the dollar bill and you can read it. That this would last for centuries because it was predicated on freedom. Freedom, not only freedom of speech, but they specifically spelled out no abridgment, no abridging of freedom of speech or of the press specifically. That's why when in the Bill of Rights it's so exciting to see and to read and to see that part of the architecture of this building, part of its aesthetic, is the beautiful truth of that First Amendment. Today, communications travels in real time. In fact, I find in my meetings, and perhaps some of you do, that it has traveled even before we've left the meeting. The blackberries at work. And that is why it's so important when we get an inkling of something, whether it's protest in Tibet or wherever it happens to be, that the most wholesome thing that can happen is that journalists are allowed in. Journalists are allowed in to insist on the truth, to find out what the truth is, whatever it may be. I was so pleased that others have referenced and that you have in the museum a journalist memorial. Journalists everywhere risk their lives when they go into these dangerous places to shine that bright light on truth. The journalist memorial here at the museum pays tribute to their sacrifices, including the men who died on the battlefield of Iraq. They lost their lives so that we can find the truth. And many times when they're in battle, it's not fair. It's not fair because they're not armed and the rest. So they really are patriotic and courageous alongside our men and women in uniform who make us the land of the free and the home of the brave. And that partnership is one that we respect. Here at home, we can continue to strengthen our democracy by enacting a federal media shield law, and I enlist your support in doing that. It is moving through Congress. We passed it in the House, because I believe that as we protect and defend our nation, we must protect and defend the Constitution, and that shield law does protect the First Amendment and the freedom of the press. That's what our founders envisioned. Do I have your cooperation in that? I'm going to associate myself, as we say in the Congress. Oh, before I go to that, let me say this. I was told when I came in, guess how many, I was asked, guess how many seats there are in the auditorium. And I looked around, I said, 500? No, 535. The exact number of members of Congress. What do you think? I think we should meet here. Democrats in Republicans, House and Senate, and no aisle between us. I'm going to associate myself with authors Marx, quoting Thomas Jefferson, who said, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost." Thank all of you who have made this museum possible so that our freedom of the press is not limited or lost. This is a great act of patriotism, establishing this museum, a great shrine to freedom. Thank you.